September 26, 1983, 12:15 a.m. Moscow time. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov sits in a secret bunker deep underground, staring at 5 red dots glowing on his radar screen. Each dot represents an incoming American nuclear missile streaking toward Soviet soil at 17,000 miles per hour. He has exactly 26 minutes before impact. 26 minutes to make the most important decision in human history. Report the attack and trigger World War III, or trust his gut instinct that something is wrong. The fate of 7 billion people now rests in the hands of a 44-year-old Soviet officer who never wanted this responsibility. What happens in the next few minutes will determine whether civilization survives or whether every major city on Earth becomes a radioactive wasteland. This is the true story of the day one man's decision saved the world, and why you've probably never heard his name. The year 1983 was already the most dangerous year of the Cold War. Ronald Reagan had just called the Soviet Union an evil empire and announced his Star Wars missile defense program. The Soviets shot down Korean Air Flight 07, killing 269 people, including a U.S. congressman. Both superpowers were convinced the other was planning a surprise nuclear attack. Paranoia was at an all-time high, and both nations were operating on hair-trigger alert. In this atmosphere of mutual distrust and fear, the Soviet Union had just completed installation of their most advanced early warning system called OCO, designed to detect any American missile launch within minutes. The system was so new that its bugs hadn't been worked out yet, but Soviet leadership trusted it completely. On this particular night, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was the duty officer at Serpukhov 15, a top-secret facility located in a bunker outside Moscow. This was the nerve center of the Soviet nuclear warning system, where a handful of officers monitored satellites and radar stations across the USSR, watching for any sign of an American first strike. Petrov was not supposed to be there that night. He was filling in for a colleague who had called in sick. A software engineer by training, he had been reluctantly transferred to this military position just months earlier. Unlike most Soviet officers, Petrov questioned everything and had a healthy skepticism of technology. He often joked that the early warning computers were more dangerous than the Americans. That skepticism was about to save the world. At exactly 12:15 a.m., every alarm in the facility began screaming. Red lights flashed across the control room as the main computer displayed a terrifying message. Missile attack, reliability high. One American intercontinental ballistic missile had been detected launching from a base in Montana, heading directly for Moscow. Soviet military doctrine was absolutely clear in this situation. Any nuclear attack, even a single missile, must be reported immediately to Soviet leadership. This would trigger an automatic massive retaliation, launching hundreds of Soviet missiles at American cities within minutes. There was no time for verification or second thoughts. The entire system was designed for speed, not accuracy. Petrov's hands trembled as he reached for the red telephone that would connect him directly to Soviet Premier Yuri Andropov and the military general staff. One call would set in motion the end of civilization as we know it. But something felt wrong. If the Americans were launching a surprise attack, why would they start with just one missile? Military logic suggested that a real first strike would involve hundreds or thousands of missiles launched simultaneously to overwhelm Soviet defenses. Starting with a single missile made no strategic sense whatsoever. As Petrov hesitated, the situation got exponentially worse. The computer screen lit up with more warnings. 2 missiles, then 3, then 4. Finally, 5 American missiles were showing on the display, all marked with the highest reliability rating. The computer was absolutely certain that World War III had begun. The protocol was ironclad. With 5 incoming missiles confirmed by the satellite system, Petrov was required to immediately notify his superiors and recommend launching a full nuclear counterstrike. Soviet missiles would be in the air within 15 minutes, targeting every major American city. Washington, D.C., New York, Chicago, Los Angeles would be vaporized within 30 minutes. The American missiles would hit Moscow, Leningrad, and other Soviet cities shortly after, killing tens of millions instantly and condemning hundreds of millions more to death from radiation and nuclear winter. But Petrov made a decision that defied every rule in the book. He declared the satellite warnings a false alarm. His reasoning was simple, but brilliant. If the Americans were really launching a first strike, they would send hundreds of missiles, not just 5. 5 missiles could never destroy the Soviet Union's ability to retaliate, so launching them would be suicide for America with no strategic benefit. It had to be a computer malfunction. However, Petrov's problems were far from over. Soviet ground-based radar stations were supposed to confirm any missile attack detected by satellites. But these radar systems could only detect missiles once they crossed the horizon, giving just minutes of warning instead of the 26 minutes provided by satellites. If American missiles were really coming, the ground radar would pick them up any moment now. Petrov waited in agony as precious minutes ticked by. His colleagues stared at him in disbelief. He was betting the entire Soviet Union on his gut instinct against the most advanced computer system ever built. If he was wrong, Soviet cities would burn while their missiles sat uselessly in their silos. His career would be over, assuming anyone survived to court-martial him. If he was right, he would save the world but probably still face punishment for disobeying direct orders and protocol. 20 minutes passed. 25, then 26. The ground-based radar stations reported nothing. No incoming missiles appeared on their screens. The satellites continued to insist that 5 American missiles were heading toward the Soviet Union, but the ground radar saw empty skies. Petrov's gamble was paying off, but he wasn't celebrating yet. He knew that if he was wrong, they would all know in just a few more minutes when nuclear warheads began detonating across the Soviet Union. As more time passed with no confirmations from ground radar, it became increasingly clear that the satellite system had malfunctioned. Later investigation revealed that the OCO satellite system had misidentified sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds as missile launches. The brand new system had a software bug that caused it to interpret certain atmospheric conditions as incoming nuclear weapons. The very technology designed to protect the Soviet Union had nearly caused its destruction, but Petrov's ordeal was far from over. Soviet authorities were furious that he had disobeyed protocol. Instead of being hailed as a hero who saved the world, he faced intense questioning and criticism from his superiors. They argued that he should have followed orders regardless of his personal doubts. The official Soviet report on the incident blamed equipment malfunction, but made no mention of Petrov's crucial decision. He was quietly transferred to a less sensitive position and eventually forced into early retirement. For years, the Soviet government kept the entire incident classified. The world never knew how close it had come to nuclear annihilation, and Petrov remained anonymous. He returned to his small apartment outside Moscow, living on a modest pension, while the world continued spinning, completely unaware that one man's skepticism had saved every living thing on the planet. Petrov himself rarely talked about that night, even to his family. He didn't consider himself a hero, just someone who used common sense in an insane situation. The truth about September 26, 1983 didn't become public until 1998, 15 years later, when the story was finally declassified and leaked to Western media. Suddenly, the world learned about the man who had prevented nuclear war with nothing but logic and courage. Stanislav Petrov became known as the man who saved the world, but he was uncomfortable with the attention. In interviews, he insisted he was just doing his job, and that anyone with common sense would have made the same decision. But that wasn't true. The Soviet system was designed to discourage exactly the kind of independent thinking that Petrov displayed. Military officers were trained to follow orders without question, especially in nuclear situations where seconds mattered. Most officers in Petrov's position would have immediately reported the attack and launched a counterstrike. After the story became public, Petrov received numerous awards and honors from around the world. The Association of World Citizens gave him their World Citizen Award. He received the Dresden Peace Prize and was invited to speak at the United Nations. Hollywood even made a documentary about his story. But these accolades came too late to change his life significantly. By then, Petrov was in his 70s, living in poverty in a small Russian town. The collapse of the Soviet Union had wiped out his pension, and he survived on less than $200 per month. The man who saved 7 billion lives couldn't afford proper medical care or heating for his apartment. This irony wasn't lost on Petrov, who maintained his dry sense of humor despite his circumstances. He once joked that he was probably the only person in history who prevented a world war and got punished for it. In 2006, he suffered a stroke and his health declined rapidly. He died in 2017 at age 77, still largely unknown to the general public, despite having performed perhaps the most important act in human history. The implications of Petrov's decision extend far beyond that single night in 1983. His story reveals just how fragile our world really is, and how often we've come close to accidental nuclear war. During the Cold War, there were dozens of similar incidents where technical malfunctions, communication failures, or human error nearly triggered nuclear exchanges. In 1995, Russian radar operators detected a submarine-launched missile heading toward Moscow. It was actually a scientific rocket launched from Norway, but Russian President Boris Yeltsin activated his nuclear briefcase and came within minutes of ordering a counterstrike. In 1979, a computer at NORAD showed a massive Soviet attack, prompting the US to scramble fighter jets and prepare for retaliation, until operators realized someone had accidentally loaded a training simulation into the live system. These incidents highlight a terrifying reality. The systems designed to protect us from nuclear war can also cause it. The same early warning systems that give us precious minutes to respond to real attacks can also generate false positives that trigger accidental wars. As technology becomes more complex and automated, the risk of catastrophic errors actually increases. Today, 9 countries possess nuclear weapons, with a combined total of over 13,000 warheads. Many of these weapons are still on hair trigger alert, ready to launch within minutes of a perceived attack. The decision-making time has gotten even shorter as missiles have become faster and more accurate. Modern hypersonic weapons can reach their targets in just minutes, leaving almost no time for human judgment calls like the one Petrov made. What makes Petrov's story even more remarkable is that he made the right decision despite having incomplete information and enormous pressure. He couldn't have known for certain that the computer was wrong. He simply used logic, experience, and intuition to conclude that something didn't make sense. In an era of increasing automation and artificial intelligence, Petrov's story reminds us of the irreplaceable value of human judgment, skepticism, and the willingness to question authority when the stakes are highest. So what can we learn from Stanislav Petrov's incredible story? First, that individual actions can have enormous consequences, even when no one is watching. Petrov made his decision alone in a bunker, with no time to consult others or seek approval. He relied on his training, his intelligence, and his moral courage to do what he believed was right, even though it violated every protocol he had been taught. Second, that technology is only as reliable as the humans who create and operate it. The OCO satellite system that nearly started World War III was the most advanced early warning system ever built, designed by the Soviet Union's best scientists and engineers. Yet it failed catastrophically on its first real test, confusing sunlight with nuclear missiles. This reminds us that no matter how sophisticated our technology becomes, human oversight and skepticism remain essential. Third, that the heroes of history are often ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances. Petrov wasn't a general or a politician. He was a mid-level officer who happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right temperament to make an impossible decision. He didn't see himself as heroic. He just refused to let fear and protocol override his common sense. Finally, Petrov's story illustrates the ongoing danger of nuclear weapons and the importance of arms control. As long as thousands of nuclear warheads exist on hair trigger alert, operated by complex systems prone to failure, another incident like September 26, 1983, remains possible. The only way to eliminate the risk of accidental nuclear war is to eliminate nuclear weapons themselves, or at least remove them from high alert status. Stanislav Petrov died in relative obscurity, but his legacy lives on in every person alive today. Every child born since 1983 owes their existence, in part, to one man's refusal to follow orders when following orders would have ended the world. In a universe of 8 billion people, it's remarkable that the fate of our entire species once depended on the judgment of a single individual who chose wisdom over protocol, thinking over obedience, and hope over fear.